Hello viewers, welcome to the second lecture on assembly language programming. In the last lecture, we have discussed the basic principles of assembly language programming, and also I have introduced to you some basic concepts of software design. We have seen that although software design is an art, but if a programmer systematically follows a set of principles, it leads to reliable, readable and maintainable software. The top-down approach and modular programming is one such principle that is commonly followed. I have discussed about this in the last lecture. There is another principle which is widely used, that is known as structured programming. Let me first introduce to you structured programming. In structured programming, the programmer divides the program into a number of well-defined blocks. Each of these blocks has some simple structure with one entry point, one exit point. So each block will have one entry and one exit point. One exit point. What are the different types of blocks that are used? First one is straight line code. Straight line code. And in the last lecture, I have given an example of a straight line code, and in such a case the block will appear like this. So you have a sequence of instructions which are always executed in the same sequence. So these instructions do not alter their sequence of execution. Apart from this simple straight line code, of which I have given an example in the last lecture, there are two more blocks, or two different types of blocks. These are do while or repeat until. Essentially, these are two types of loops, do while and repeat until types of loops, and their structure look like this. This is the entry point, then there is a decision box, and if the decision is true or yes, then some straight line codes are executed or some subtask is performed, and this is the if the decision outcome is no, not correct, then it goes out, and then after performing the subtask again it comes back to this point. So it keeps on looping. So that's why do while this condition is satisfied. So this subtask is performed as long as this condition is satisfied. So this has got single exit, single entry and single exit point. Similarly, you have repeat until type of structure like this. Here you have got a subtask to be performed, which are represented by a straight line code. It is followed by a decision box, and if the outcome of the decision is, so here it goes out, and here if the outcome of the decision is yes, then this is performed, this block is again performed, otherwise it goes out. So this is your repeat until. Repeat until type of loop. So these are the two types of loops which are commonly used in structured programming, and there is another type of decision making block, that is if then else. In if then else, there is a single entry, then there is a decision making, and if the decision outcome is true or yes, then a particular subtask is performed. If the outcome is no, then some other subtask is performed. That means if it is true or yes, then this block; if it is not true, then some other block is performed. Then it comes out and goes out through a single exit point. Obviously, in all these cases, you find that you have got single entry and single exit, and structured programming do not suggest, do not permit to use go to type of jump. That means unconditional jump is not recommended in structured programming because it may lead to ambiguity and other things. So this is your structured programming blocks. Now we see you have got decision making and you have got loops, which we shall discuss in this particular lecture. How decision making is done, how loops are performed, and we shall discuss at length these things, these topics. So program looping is very important in writing in writing software. You will find that if a subtask has to be performed repeatedly, then you take the help of a loop. You don't have to repeat that particular subtask, that program for that subtask repeatedly. And in terms of instructions, the entire loop program can be divided into 4 distinct components. 4 distinct components. What are the 4 distinct components? First one, in one component it does initialization. Initialization of loop parameters. So loop parameters are initialized in this particular block. So if you express in terms of flowchart, then it will, after you start the program, it will have a state line code box, block or box, whatever you say, where you will do this initialization of some loop parameters. Next block will have process or subtask. That process or subtask can be a, usually it can be a state line code box where you will have a number of instructions to be executed to implement that process or subtask, and which is repeated, subtask to be repeated. And this is followed by another small block comprising few instructions which modify loop parameters. The loop parameters which has been initialized in this block is modified here after performing the subtask. Then obviously you have to perform test and branch. So there will be a decision box which will test a particular condition, what condition that will be decided later, and if the condition is valid, then it goes back and the execution of the subtask is repeated. Otherwise it comes out and the program stops. So this is a generalized schematic of a program which performs looping. Let us illustrate with an example, then it will be clear how these different blocks are implemented, and particularly I should discuss about the decision box. We know that we have already discussed the branch group of instructions, where we have seen there is a conditional branch instruction. It is not just one instruction. If you consider all the conditions, essentially you have got 8 different instruction: jump not 0, jump 0, jump no carry, uh, jump carry, jump when jump uh, parity odd, jump parity even, jump positive, jump negative or minus. So you can see there are 8 different situations which are based on which the decision is taken. We know that whenever you perform some arithmetic or logical operation, some data processing you do, the flag bits condition, those flag bits, sum, carry, parity, 0, those flag bits get modified, and based on that the decision is taken. So in the decision box, one of the 4 different parameters, that is sign, 0, carry and parity, these are checked, and based on that decision is taken. So let us see with the help of an example how it is done. Here let us start with the formal specification of a problem. Here we would like to write a program to input 100 bytes of data from an IO device and store in memory. So what we are doing? We are reading from an input output device 100 bytes of data. That means you have to repeat reading of data from an input device 100 times and store it in memory. That also has to be repeated. Obviously, in the design phase, you will develop the flowchart to get the structure of the program. So here in the beginning, you have to initialize 2 things. You have to initialize. You have to keep count of the number of bytes. So if you set one count register with some value, and also you have to keep track of the memory location where you have to store. So you have to also initialize a location register which will provide the information of the address where the data which is inputted from the IO device will be stored. So this block essentially does that initialization part which I have mentioned here. So this particular block is implemented in this part of the initialization. After that, it does that inputting. So I am using a box which is essentially a input output from the IO device. So input 1 byte of data, 1 byte of data from IO and store. So this is the task to be performed repeatedly. And after this is done, you have to modify these loop parameters, the count register, location register values. And so you will require a block where you will modify loop parameters. In this case, the loop parameters are are essentially the count register and the location register. Then you have to do some kind of decision making. You have to check whether the count register is equal to 0 or not. If the answer is yes, if all the data has been inputted and stored, then it will stop. On the other hand, if the answer is no, then it will go back to this point. So this is how it will continue, the looping will continue. Let us now convert this design and do the coding. So the initialization can be done by using simple instructions like MVI. Let's assume we use B register as the count register and initialize with 100, that is 64 in hex. Then let's assume we would like to store the data starting from memory location, sorry, it will be LXI, let's assume it is HL register is used starting from 2000 H. So with the help of this instruction, this part of the operation is performed. Then you have to input data from memory IO location 10. 10 is the address of the IO device, and after inputting it goes to the accumulator. So you have to move it to memory location by using that register indirect addressing. So your HL register pair is already holding the address. So with the help of this instruction, that data which is inputted is transferred to the memory location. So this part is done here. Then you have to increment INX H, increment that, I mean modifying the loop parameters. You have to increment the HL register pair. Also you have to decrement the count register. After decrementing, you have to check whether this condition is satisfied or not. So this decision is done with the help of this JNZ jump not 0, and then you have to go back to a point where it to this point. So you have to provide a level here, because this you are looping back to this point. You may be asking why level is not provided for all other instructions. Why only level is provided in this case? The reason for that is we know that the program counter keeps tracks of these addresses, and obviously we shall be using one org sudo of which will specify, let's assume the starting address is 3000H, and then accordingly the program counter will keep track of the location values, and the assembler will be able to generate this. But this address has to be given here, otherwise this program, this symbolic address cannot be put unless we put a level here. And then comes the stop instruction, that is your halt. I have not given any comment here. It is advisable that you put comment for each block of instruction. Since I have written the flowchart, I have not given any comment. So it is advisable that you put comment so that program is understandable who has not written it, and at later part debugging can be done easily. Now program loop has some other important applications, particularly for implementing counter and timing delays. We know that the delay can be generated by using some timer. You may have studied that 555 timer counter chip, with the help of which you can generate delay. Later on we shall discuss one special hardware chip which can be used for generating delay. But there are many situations where delay is generated by software means. So loops can be used to generate delays. So this is an example where the delay can be generated with the help of loops. Here the problem specification is generate time delay by software technique. So a very simple specification. How it can be done? In the design phase, you will implement a flowchart, start, then again you have to initialize a register which will act as a counter, and that will, the count value will decide the delay. Then simply decrement the register R, and then you will check whether the register had become 0 or not. So is register R is equal to 0? If the answer is no, you look back, and if the answer is yes, it has become already 0, you stop. So with the help of which you can generate some delay, and the corresponding code is MVI, say B is used as that register R, and you initialize with a value, say num. Then you do the decrementing with the help of a register, with the help of the instruction DCR. Then you implement this block by using J, NZ, loop. So and here you have to put the level for loop, and then halt. The program is as simple as this. You may be asking how much delay will be generated. For that purpose, you have to count the number of states. For example, this one has got 7, this will require 7 states to execute, this will require 4 states to execute, this will require 7 or 10 depending on when the condition is satisfied or not, and this will require 4 states. So what is the delay time generated by this? By this simple instruction, delay time will be, you see, these instructions will be executed only once. So 7 plus 4 plus 10. 4 plus 10 will be executed number of times, that means depending on this value, 10 plus 4 plus 7. So whenever it goes out 7, then it will halt, and this into the time period of the clock. That means the each state will have some time period, and that has to be multiplied. So this will be the time in usually it is expressed in microsecond. You will get a delay in terms of microsecond because clocks are of the order of megahertz, and based on that you will get a delay like this. So you can compute the delay that can be generated by this kind of loop. But here you may see that the loop, the delay generated may not be very long. If we want to increase the delay time, how we can do that? To do that, you have to use a register pair. How? For example, instead of using a single register, you can initialize a register pair D with the value number, but in this case the number will be 16-bit number instead of 8-bit number. Then you will perform the decrementing DCX D. However, one thing you must notice, in this particular case, whenever you do the decrementing, all the flag bits including Z, that means 0 flag bit, is modified. On the other hand, whenever you decrement a register pair, none of the flag bits are modified. So, you cannot take decision just based on the outcome of this decrementing. So, you have to do something more. So, what you do, you move A D, move the content of D register to A, then you perform OR operation with that E register. So, if both D and E are 0, then the 0 flag bit will be 0. So, based on that decision, you write jump not 0 as 0, and here you have to use a label del delay. Del stands for delay, and halt. Obviously, in this case the total time required will be much longer. So, 10 cycles, this will be 6 cycles, 4 cycles, 4 cycles, 7 or 10, and then 4. So, delay time you can easily compute based on this. Delay time will be equal to 10 plus 24. 24 is the total time for execution of one loop. 6 plus 4 plus 4 plus 10. So, that is 24 into that value of number plus 21. Whenever the last one, whenever it goes out, you require 3 clock cycle less into T. That is the time required for the execution of this program. So, this is the delay generation, delay time that will be generated by using a register pair. You may be asking, here we are using only one loop, why not use two loops, loop within a loop or nested loop? Yes, we can also do that, and which is illustrated with the help of this example. So, time delay with two loops. So, here what we do, we are loading a register. This is the flow chart. Load register R1. Here you are initializing a register with value R1. You are initializing another register R2 with some other value. Then decrement R2 and here you check is R2 is equal to 0. If the answer is no, you go back to this point and if the answer is yes, you come out of the loop. You see, until this register value R2 is becomes 0, it keeps on looping. This is one loop. Then you come out of this and then you decrement R1, and here you check whether R1 has become. So, is R1 is equal to 0? If the answer is no, you go back here to the outer loop. So, you see we have two loops, one is inner loop, another is outer loop, and if the answer is yes, then you come out of the outer loop and stop. And you can write the code for it. It is very simple. MVI, say B is used to store N1, then loop L1, outer loop MVI, another register C as N2, then you can, so this the pointer should be there, label should be here, decrement C, then jump to L2. So, this is your inner loop, then you will do decrement B and jump L1, and it keeps on looping, and as it comes out you will stop execution by a halt. So you find out that I give it as an exercise to you, find out the delay time in this case. That is an exercise to you. Now, apart from loops, another important type of uh, uh, principle that is followed, as I told, that is your top-down approach or modular programming, where we divide the program into a number of modules, and obviously the modules are represented in terms of subroutines. We have already discussed about the subroutine call and return concepts. Here we have already discussed how a subroutine can be called and how you can return from the subroutine. For example, this is a subroutine call instruction which requires and as you can see here, when a subroutine is called, you are pushing the stack, pushing the next address of the next address in the stack. That means PCH and PC low are stored in stack, then stack pointer is decremented by 2 and program counter is initialized with this value. So it jumps to this address, we know that. So stack keeps track of the address where the return has to take place. We have already discussed how this subroutine call and return occurs. You can also have conditional subroutine calls, but in any case, whether it is conditional or unconditional, you will require return, either conditional return or conditional return, to come out of the subroutine. So subroutine plays an important role in modular programming. So we shall discuss how subroutines are implemented and what are the important characteristics of a subroutine, what precautions you have to take whenever you write subroutine for implementing a task. First of all, inside subroutine, okay, before I discuss the precautions you have to take, let me explain the use of this term subroutine linkage. What do we really mean by subroutine linkage? By subroutine linkage, I mean invoking a subroutine, executing the subroutine, and returning from the subroutine. So there are three aspects. Whenever you invoke a subroutine, sometimes you have to see that you have to push some parameters in the stack. You have to pass some parameters to the calling subroutine. Then whenever you execute the subroutine, you have to implement the task. Then before you return from the subroutine, you have to pop the addresses from the stack, and you have to also return the parameters from the subroutine to the main program. So all these aspects together is known as subroutine linkage. So whenever you do subroutine linkage, it involves three basic operations: invoking a subroutine, processing a subroutine, and returning from the subroutine. Now you have to whenever the subroutine linkage is done, inside the subroutine whenever you are processing a subroutine, you may be using push and pop instructions. So whenever you use push and pop instructions inside a subroutine, you should be very careful so that the return address which has been stored in the stack is not lost. Otherwise, you will not be able to return from the subroutine. So the push and pop should be performed in a balanced manner. Should be performed in a balanced manner. That means the number of push and number of pop has to be same. This is very important consideration, otherwise you may lose the return address. Another is that if you use some general purpose registers, there is a necessity to save registers, general purpose registers. Suppose you have used some registers in your main program, and as you call the subroutine, that subroutine also use the same set of registers. So, the value, the intermediate values which were stored in those registers by the main program will be lost if those registers are not saved. So, you have to save those general purpose registers before you jump to the subroutine. And finally, you have to develop suitable mechanism for parameter passing. Parameter passing. Parameter passing, essentially it is a two-way thing. First of all, some parameters have to be passed from the subroutine to the main program, and some parameters, the result will be passed from the subroutine to the main program. So, from main program to the subroutine and subroutine to the main program, both ways some parameters are to be passed. How the parameters can be passed? Usually there are three techniques. Number one is using registers. You have a set of general purpose registers inside the CPU. Those general purpose registers can be used for passing parameters from subroutine, from main program to the subroutine, and from subroutine to the main program. However, whenever you use general purpose registers for passing parameters, the number of parameters that can be passed is very limited. For example, your 8085 processor has got only 6 general purpose registers. So, if the number of parameters is more than 6, you cannot use general purpose registers for passing parameters. So, the another alternative technique for doing that is to use, or you can say use main memory. So, you can use main memory to pass a large block of parameter. However, the registers are used as a pointer to these memory blocks. So, whenever the memory is used, usually it is used in conjunction with registers. So, some registers are also used along with this as pointer to this main memory. And finally, another technique that can be used for passing parameter is through stack. Let me illustrate the use of parameter passing by using registers, because which is the simplest and most widely used, and how program linkage is done by passing parameters. The problem that I shall use to illustrate the parameter passing is write a software delay routine by passing parameters using the general purpose register. So, you will have two programs, one is main program, your main program may be big one, but at the before you call the subroutine, main program will have load delay parameters, in registers. Depending on the delay you want, we have already seen that delay time can be short or small. If you want short delay, just one register will do. If you want long delay, you have to use a register pair or two registers. Then after setting these parameters in registers, you will simply call the delay routine. So delay routine will be called, and of course it will have another part of the program. Now let's see, this is the delay routine, subroutine. So delay subroutine will have, first of all, since the the delay parameters are already in the registers, you don't have to initialize it, because already when you have uh, gone to this subroutine, jump to this subroutine, already the parameter values are inside the program. So you simply modify delay parameters, and obviously you check test to branch, and depending on the condition you will keep on looping. Otherwise, here you see we are ending our program by return, and program of course in this case is very simple. LXI, we have used a register pair here to initialize the delay parameters. So DE register pair is holding the delay parameter. Then we call the subroutine, and del is the name of the delay subroutine. So this is where it starts. So you see that D register, through D register you are passing the parameter to this subroutine, and you have to use DCX, modifying the parameters, DCXD, then the usual thing, so that the flag bit is modified over AE whenever D becomes 0, JNZ del, so it loops and then return. So here is a simple subroutine, delay subroutine I have written, and you can call it from the by using a main program, and as you can see here the delay parameter is passed by using a register pair. So register pair plays a very important role in passing parameters. But whenever you are using a say memory, whenever the number of parameters is big, say suppose you have to pass an array of element, large number of data, which is in main memory. What you can do, you can initialize a register pair. Usually the HL register pair is initialized to as a pointer to the beginning of the uh, parameter address, I mean the array of the array values, and the number of elements in your the number of elements you have got, that can be also passed on by using another register. So that will hold the number of elements. So you see that these two can be passed by the program. The HL register pair will be initialized by the starting address, B will be initialized with the number, then it will call the subroutine, but actual parameters will come from the main memory. So this is how parameter passing can be done by using by using main memory. However, you are doing it in conjunction with some registers, pointer registers and counter registers. And as you know, stack also can be used. You can, before calling a subroutine, you can push some element. So you can push some parameters by using push instructions, and then call the subroutine. And as you going to enter the subroutine will pop equal number of times to get the parameters and do the necessary processing and return the result in the same manner. So returning of the result can also be done in the same way, by using main memory or by using stack. So we have briefly discussed how you can pass parameters by using uh, different techniques by using registers, by using memory, and by using stack. Now, I mentioned about a subroutine, the nested subroutine calls. If you remember, nested subroutine calls. We have discussed about it while discussing the subroutine instructions. For example, here is your main program, and suppose it is calling a subroutine. This is your subroutine. Now, here you have got call subroutine 1, say call subroutine 1. This instruction has occurred. So, it will jump to this subroutine, but before the execution is complete, suppose it has reached this point, here there is another call. So, it will jump to another subroutine, and it may so happen that here there is another subroutine. This will call subroutine call, and it will jump to another subroutine, and maybe this one is allowed to complete, then you will return in this manner, then it will return to this point, then it will be executed and return to this point, then it will be executed, return to this point. In this way it will return. This is called nested subroutine calls. Now, how many nesting you can do in this manner will depend on the size of the stack. Because each time you are calling a subroutine, you are pushing some data into the stack, and before you return, if you call another subroutine, obviously those parameters remain in the stack, that data remain in the stack. So, in this way stack gets more and more data get pushed into the stack, and it may so happen that stack overflow can take place. So, stack overflow has to be prevented, and that is why you have to decide you have to decide the size of the stack properly, so that stack overflow does not occur when you do nested subroutine calls. One important extension of this nested subroutine call is recursive routine. Recursive call. In this case, the subroutine is calling itself. So, there are a number of problems for which you can write an elegant program by writing a recursive routine, but the requirement for recursive routine and requirement for nested subroutine calls is more or less same. Your requirement is a good size of stack. Let me illustrate how a recursive subroutine call is executed. Let me illustrate with a very simple problem, the sum of first n natural numbers. Of course, you can write a loop and you can do that, but whenever you write a recursive subroutine, then program is very elegant. Let us see how it can be done. Here is the program, recursive addition. First n natural numbers you are adding. So, push B, you are essentially saving working register. B is the working register. Then move AB, decrement A, jump 0 last. Let me write down the program, then I shall explain. So here you see inside the program there is a call instruction to this, and then add, here is your last, then pop add B, pop B and return. Here you are doing move N to working register, and here you are performing n 10-1, and here you are performing f, these are the comments, f n-1 is equal to 0, then fn, if n-1 is equal to 0, then fn is equal to 0, otherwise else f is equal to f n-1. Then here it does fn is equal to n plus fn-1. Then here it restores, here it was saved, restore working register, and here it returns. This is the program. Let me explain with the help of another diagram how this recursive routine is working. This is your main program. Main program, you have come out to this. Then at this point, a subroutine call take place with f when the function is equal to fn. That means you have to compute fn is equal to 0 plus 1 plus 2 up to n plus n. Now at this point, you have seen that you are calling the same subroutine. That means you are calling it again when for f is equal to n-1. Again you are calling for f n-2. In this way you will continue until you reach f1, and when you reach f1, then you perform the computation, then you perform this computation, this part of computation. How you do that? You perform f1 is equal to 0 plus 1, that you do in this iteration. Then as you return to this point, and in this part again you compute f2 is equal to 2 plus f1. So in this way, in each part you do the computation, and at the end whenever you reach, in this way you go back returning, then fn will be computed equal to n plus fn minus n minus 1. So here the final value is calculated and returned to the main program. So you see here in the return path the computation is taking place, and ultimately you are returning the value to the main program. So then the main program will continue. So this is how a recursive routine works. So I have explained how a subroutine works and how a recursive routine works, which is a special type of subroutine. And in this lecture we have covered lot of ground. We have discussed the concept of structured programming. We have discussed the conditional jumps and looping techniques, and how the registers can be used as counters and you can generate timing delays. We have also discussed how you can implement nested loops, and we have discussed how subroutines can be implemented, how you can do parameter passing by using registers, memory locations and stack, and also briefly we have discussed about recursive subroutine. And with this we come to the end of our discussion on assembly language programming. In the next lecture, we shall discuss about memory interfacing. Thank you.